At some point, the Trump administration is going to have to give on some level when it comes to the Iranians, who really do have the U.S. in a corner.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. So the Trump administration keeps saying a deal with Iran is close. It's close. It's close. But recent strikes are a reminder that nothing is a done deal when it comes to this war. We're going to get to the very latest in the negotiations. Plus, they say once is an accident, twice is a coincidence, three times is a pattern. So is Trump about to go for a threefer in the Cornyn versus Paxton matchup in Texas? And people are obsessed with a chilling new horror film called Obsession. Why is this spooking more traditional filmmakers? So you've got Iran and the U.S. continuing to play this game with will they or won't they end the war. On Monday, the U.S. military launched strikes against Iranian missile sites and boats near the Strait of Hormuz. Two U.S. officials told NBC News they were in response to Iran's IRGC launching surface-to-air missiles and drones over a 24-hour period. Now, Iran called the strikes a clear violation of the ceasefire. But a spokesperson for CENTCOM said the U.S. military is continuing to, quote, use restraint during the ongoing ceasefire. So there is, by the way, still a ceasefire, it seems, or as far as the U.S. is concerned. And we're hearing Secretary of State Marco Rubio tell reporters once again that a deal between the U.S. and Iran is close. He said it could be finalized within a couple of days. So is there a ceasefire? I mean, the U.S. says there is, but does Iran? Is there going to be a deal in the next few days, possibly, maybe, or next few weeks, or next few months, or ever? And could these latest strikes curtail progress, or were they just another love tap, as the president called them earlier this month? For this, I want to bring in Matt Bradley, foreign correspondent for NBC News based in Tel Aviv. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Yasmin.
So let's talk about these most recent strikes. CENTCOM said these strikes on Monday were targeting Iranian missile sites and boats that were trying to place mines in the Strait of Hormuz. What more do we know about what went on?
I mean, this looks like it was very similar to what we've seen several weeks earlier, where there were similar strikes that the U.S. said were basically defensive, and that didn't break the ceasefire, despite the fact that, once again, we're seeing a really, really hostile situation, and we're still seeing, presumably, negotiations going on. So all of this is happening concurrently, and it looks as though these strikes, while they have angered everyone on both sides, they haven't broken the ceasefire, and it doesn't look like they've broken those negotiations. Now, that could change at any time, because, as you know, for the past couple of weeks, there's been whiplash back and forth. We've heard about imminent war that didn't happen, and we heard about an imminent negotiated ceasefire that didn't happen.
The president has said, okay, if we're able to make a deal with Iran, along with that, he wants all the Gulf nations to sign on to the Abraham Accords, which was an agreement that was made during the president's first term to normalize relations with Israel between Israel and Gulf nations. And at the time, back in his first term, the only two that signed on were Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. But now it seems the president has kind of proposed this potential, this prospect of having all Gulf nations sign on to the Abraham Accords, along with this peace deal, potential peace deal between the U.S. and Iran. They're not reacting well to it.
They balked. And in many ways, I think that what we heard from some of the reporting that came out of this was that it was almost a feeling of disbelief. They couldn't believe, as they say here in Israel, they couldn't believe the chutzpah from the president trying to throw all of this stuff into the same deal. And again, when we're talking about this administration, and I think when we're talking about allies or military partners, particularly in the Gulf region, not a lot of them are necessarily going to be hanging a lot on each individual thing that the president says. So while they're going to be feeling disbelief, and certainly they're going to be a bit shocked by the president's demand, I would imagine that a lot of these other countries are just going to see this as one of Trump's peccadillos, one of his, strange little habits, and they might just let it slide. It looks as though the president is on some level, if he wants to resolve this, if he wants to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and resume international trade to where it was before, he's going to have to make some sort of climb down. And these sorts of things, this ask about the Abraham Accords, he sees as a legacy-saving Hail Mary to try to get something good that he can boast about out of this deal.
So are they going to make a deal by the end of this week, as the Secretary of State said? Where do things stand right now?
Well, look, I don't know. A lot of my colleagues don't know. The terms of the memorandum of understanding that we had understood from various reports that came out last week, we don't know whether that's a moving target or whether or not that still stands. That could change at any time, and it's still under negotiation. But the fact is, we know what the parameters of this conflict are at this very moment. And it looks as though at some point the Trump administration is going to have to give on some level when it comes to the Iranians, who really do have the U.S. in a corner. But, whether or not these sorts of Hail Mary throws, like I was saying, demanding that everybody join the Abraham Accords, that it be expanded, that to me smacks of a kind of desperation that the Trump administration would like to be able to get something from this deal. That when they make the deal, when they're facing the criticism for whatever's in the deal, particularly from their Republican allies who supported this conflict, some of the right-wing hawks who were on board with it, they're going to want to be able to say that they got something from it. And the fact that he's asking for this Abraham Accords thing makes me think that President Trump doesn't expect to get much from this.
All that being said, we talked about Lebanon, and I do want to get to that briefly, because there's never been a ceasefire in Lebanon. That is the truth. There has been continued fighting in southern Lebanon this entire time. The buffer zone, the 10 kilometers of border zone that Israel has occupied inside Lebanon, they have maintained as well. Would the end to the war between the U.S. and Iran have any impact on fighting, ongoing fighting, potential peace between Israel and Lebanon?
Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, and his military are itching to get fully into the fight in Lebanon. And it has become an enormous political scandal for Benjamin Netanyahu himself, who is now facing the most contentious prime ministerial elections or national elections coming up probably before the end of October here in Israel, where he could really lose for the first time in quite a while. And all of it looks to the Israeli public, and you see this in the media and all the talk shows, it looks like this is President Trump basically putting the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and Benjamin Netanyahu in handcuffs when it comes to their operations in Lebanon. Why? Well, we've heard from the Iranians and we heard from the Pakistanis that they wanted to make it so clear at the outset that the conflict between Hezbollah and Israel was part of the broader conflict between the U.S. and Israel on one side and Iran on the other. So if that breaks, then that could threaten the negotiations and the ceasefire between Iran and the U.S. and Israel. But many people are really hoping that Benjamin Netanyahu does the one thing that everybody here in Israel agrees he is the best at: extracting concessions from the West. Benjamin Netanyahu, every time he runs, one of the big things that he says is that when it comes to dealing with Washington or London or whoever, that he is the one who can make Israel's case the best to Israel's top partners. And if he can't do that today, if he can't say to the Trump administration, you need to unshackle the IDF and let us run through Lebanon and destroy Hezbollah, he could pay a very, very serious price at the polls this fall.
Matt Bradley, thank you.
Thanks, Yasmin.
So I've said it before, and I'm probably going to say it again. The primary election tonight in Texas is a test of President Trump's grip on the Republican Party, and so far he's been faring very well. This one has been another will he or won't he. For months, the president has been hemming and hawing about whether or not he's going to back four-term Senator John Cornyn in the runoff for the GOP Senate primary. Last week, he actually finally made a commitment, but he did not commit to Cornyn. He committed to State Attorney General Ken Paxton, giving his endorsement and now calling Paxton a true MAGA warrior. Now, Trump has been on this winning streak of unseating, quote unquote, disloyal Republicans. But this one is a bit more complicated because A.G. Paxton was actually impeached by the Republican-controlled state House. He was later acquitted, though, by the state Senate. So will Republicans back another Trump-endorsed candidate despite some major flaws? And if they do, could that play into Democrats' hands in the midterms? So for this, I want to bring in NBC News national politics reporter, Bridget Bowman. Hey, Bridget.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Okay, so when we initially talked about a Paxton-Cornyn contest, there was no endorsement from President Trump at the time during Texas's initial primary. Now they're in this runoff election, and the president has in fact endorsed, instead of the incumbent, John Cornyn, he has endorsed State Attorney General Ken Paxton, who is a flawed candidate. He's got a lot of baggage that he's bringing to the table. Why has the president chosen to endorse Ken Paxton now?
Yeah, it's been a lot of drama around this potential endorsement. And this endorsement came last week, 1 week before the primary runoff. So it was really coming down to the wire here. And we have known for months that Senate leaders, including Senate Majority Leader John Thune, had been really pushing the president to back Senator Cornyn. They saw him as the most electable candidate in a general election. But we also know that Paxton's allies were also talking to the White House, sharing polling. Folks like Steve Bannon were really vocal publicly, discouraging the president from endorsing Cornyn, urging him to back Paxton instead. And our understanding from reporting from Catherine Doyle and Matt Dixon, our colleagues on the White House team and the political team, is that it was really polling that ultimately swayed President Trump here, that he saw polling from Paxton's side that showed him likely to win a runoff. Remember, in runoff, we typically see lower turnout. So that's where you see the more kind of hardcore conservatives really winning over these really activated voters who are going to show up in a runoff, more than 2 months after the primary. So it really was he trying kind of backing a winning horse here to some extent, and also had been feeling good. He had just ousted Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy. He's on the cusp of ousting Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie. So really feeling good about the power of his endorsement, deciding to make a last minute push here.
Okay, so the president has kind of been on this tour of wanting to unseat all of his disloyal Republican legislators, right? And he has been successful in doing that so far. You mentioned Thomas Massie. He did, in fact, prove to be successful there, unseating Thomas Massie in the state of Kentucky, a congressman there. In Louisiana, it was Senator Cassidy as well, right? These are folks that the president has seen as not necessarily voting in line with him, not necessarily supporting a lot of the things that the president has supported. With Massie specifically, it was obviously the war in Iran. It was the release of the Epstein files. But I mentioned how Attorney General Ken Paxton is a flawed candidate. He's got a lot of baggage. Do you think his endorsement could bear out differently this time, considering the candidate he is backing?
Potentially. In a runoff, it seems like Paxton is really in a strong position here because of those turnout dynamics that I mentioned. Now, we have seen Senator Cornyn and an outside group that's been backing him has way outspent Paxton on the airwaves. They spent a lot more money heading into this runoff, which could give him a little bit of a boost. The Cornyn campaign also says they have a robust turnout operation, that they're really working hard to turn out their voters. But in a runoff situation, it does seem like it's Paxton's race to lose to some extent, and the Trump endorsement potentially pushing him over the edge. In a general election, that becomes a different conversation, right? Like, do his controversies become a real problem for voters who just can't stomach voting for him, even if he has the president's endorsement? That's a real open question right now.
So then it's, okay, let's say if Paxton pulls through in this runoff, we have talked in the lead up to this runoff about whether or not Paxton and or Cornyn has a better chance of beating James Talarico, who has had a lot of kind of national media attention, to say the least, and seems like a more center-left candidate. So could feasibly be like the person who actually turns Texas finally, right, to get a Democratic senator in place. But I mean, listen, we've had this conversation before. Is Texas going to be purple? Is it not? And every single time Texas has proven bright red for the most part. So is there going to be an issue if, in fact, Paxton does make it over the finish line going up against Talarico? Is that something that's being taken into account? Or at this point, do they just see Texas as going red no matter what?
If Paxton is the Republican nominee, Democrats feel a lot better about Texas because they can feel like they can leverage those controversies, the impeachment. He's also in an ongoing divorce, and he has like personal and professional controversies that he's dealing with that Democrats feel like they can take advantage of. But Paxton team argues that he can turn out these lower propensity Trump voters who only really show up to support the president. Their team argues that Paxton has a lot of loyalty from those folks, and can he turn them out? It's been really hard for any candidate not named Trump to be able to do that. So this will be a real test of Paxton's strength. The one big dynamic to keep in mind when it comes to Texas is it is just incredibly expensive to campaign there. There are like 20 media markets. It takes millions and millions and millions of dollars to reach all of these voters. Talarico has been a really strong fundraiser. Paxton has not been as strong. So our Republican outside groups voters going to have to spend a lot of money in Texas? Will they be willing to spend? Will President Trump's super PAC that has $300 million, will they face pressure to back Paxton here? That all is kind of an open question that's going to be raised a lot after this primary if Paxton is the nominee. But I think Texas is, as you alluded to, kind of the white whale for Democrats. They have been saying for years, Texas is not a red state, it's a non-voting state, but of course have kind of suffered losses every time. They do feel like this is a unique year for Democrats. When I was in Texas in February before that primary, I did talk to some Republican voters who were voting for Cornyn in the primary who said, I cannot vote for Paxton. I cannot stomach it. I view him as corrupt. I will stay home and not vote if he's the nominee. Or one voter I talked to was a little intrigued by Talarico. So if you get enough of those folks to stay home, does that finally give Democrats the combination they need to win? We'll have to see, but you never say never, I guess.
When you're talking about the money, if in fact it's Ken Paxton versus James Talarico, you mentioned it might cost Republicans a heck of a lot more money for turnout when it comes to Ken Paxton. Where then is that money being taken from, right? Like what races will they then have to pay less attention to if they're paying more attention to Ken Paxton? And how much is that being taken into account?
Yeah, that is a big concern. And we saw Republican senators last week when the president endorsed Ken Paxton openly questioning this, openly saying this is going to take money from some of these other races. As Republicans are defending their majority, they're already planning to spend in some pretty red states, including Ohio, North Carolina, Iowa, Alaska. But they also want to go on offense. They want to grow the majority. So they're looking at states like Michigan and Georgia. It's really those states that I just named. It's really hard to see Republicans pulling out of any of them because they are so key to the majority. But they're looking, if they are looking a little further, like a state like New Hampshire that they feel like they can put in play, are they not going to spend there? It's a little bit cheaper, but like, are they not going to spend there if they have to save some money for Texas? Are they going to pull back in Michigan and Georgia even? That remains to be seen. But yeah, it's going to take a lot of money for sure.
Bridget Bowman, thank you.
Thank you.
And we are back with Here's the Scoop from NBC News. So I don't know about you guys, but my kids were obsessed with watching The Mandalorian this weekend. But it is not the Star Wars spinoff that is actually getting all the hype this weekend. It is a horror movie, and it's made by a 26-year-old YouTuber called Obsession. So for that, I want to bring in NBC News culture and trends editor Sabah Hamadi for more on this.
Yes. Hello. Thanks for having me.
Sabah, so what is up with this? You've got this, young kid, right? He's a YouTuber, and now he's got all this box office success in the theaters. And there is now this obsession with this movie, this horror movie, I should say, Obsession.
Yes. So he sort of blew up relatively quickly because he was really big on YouTube, as you said. Last year in September 2025 at the Toronto International Film Festival, he brought Obsession. And people were so blown away by it that it actually prompted a little bidding war between A24 Neon and Focus Features, which is one of our Universal siblings. But Focus won, and they ended up paying $15 million, which is a pretty decent amount at a film festival.
Can I stop you for a second? Because this thing was made on a tiny budget of $750,000 over 20 days. So you're telling me that it was made with that little money in that little time, and then they took this thing to market and it was bid on and they sold it for 15 mil?
Right. So all of that in itself is a huge deal.
Yeah.
Right. And then, they rolled it out in theaters last weekend, not Memorial Day weekend, the weekend before. And it just received such positive word of mouth and buzz and hype that this weekend it came number 2 to Mandalorian, which, as you know, is a huge Star Wars franchise film. Not only did it come second to Star Wars, but it grew 39% from its opening weekend,
wow,
which is something that even horror genre king Jason Blum marveled at, because it's very, very rare to hold your box office earnings, weekend one, but it's even more rare to grow that large amount, especially for a horror film.
So it's closing in on $80 million, which is also insane. What's crazy is that Curry Barker, who's this 26-year-old filmmaker, right, from YouTube, who made this film Obsession, like, he's not alone in this. There is a rise, it seems, a more of a prevalence of these really young filmmakers gaining success on YouTube and then taking it mainstream.
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing a lot of YouTubers and seeing this success. In February, there was actually a creator named Marky Plier who released his own film that he self-funded called Iron Lung. And that also became a surprise box office hit. And I think people were very, very interested in that just because it showcased that you could not only do this and surpass the sort of studio system, but you could do it on your own and for cheap.
Saba Hamidi, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that is going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. And if you like what you heard and you saw, press the subscribe button. We'll see you tomorrow.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.